Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor Surajit Mazumdar from Ambedkar University, Delhi. Surajit, good to have you with Newsclick.
Thank you.
We're going to discuss what has been going around for some time in the press, the Sen Bhagwati debates regarding development versus growth, the Gujarat model versus Kerala model. Do you think that there is really a very substantive difference between the two, or much of it is really a part of the media hype?
Yes, of course, it is true that the question of growth versus development is a question, and that growth automatically translates into development is not something that even in the field of development economics is widely accepted. The idea of a trickle down effect of growth is something that was discredited many decades ago.
But that is Professor Bhagwati's position consistently.
Yeah, so of course, with the rise of neoliberalism, that old view that all you need to do is to ensure growth and development will follow is something that had a revival. Okay. Even though historical experience had shown that is not only before the rise of neoliberalism, but even afterwards, it showed that growth does not automatically translate into development. And the fact that it has not been the case even in India in the last 20 years, that you have had growth, periods of growth which have been unprecedented in India's history, and yet the general conditions of large segments of the Indian population have not actually progressed during this period. That context has provided the basis for this kind of a debate.
That raises two important issues. Let's take the first one that you have raised, that what is meant by development. Does development just means, roads, infrastructure, electricity, and does also development mean the conditions of the people, education, health, etc. So, do you think there is also a discussion or a debate about what is development?
Well, this of course is an old question, that development is not just about growth. Even when you get growth in terms of sheer growth of income, how that income is distributed is of course is a question. So, it is entirely possible for an economy to grow and grow very rapidly, while the incomes of large segments of the population do not increase, and that has been the case in India.
So, much larger inequality is being created while the so-called GDP growth is taking place.
Yes.
So, effectively the benefits of the growth are going to a certain section, yes, and not percolating to other sections of the people.
When a certain segment of the population income increases rapidly because of growth, even if the rest of the society is not experiencing a similar increase, it is still possible in principle to think of a process where the state enters into the picture to redistribute the benefits of that growth, so that if some people grow, that can have a positive effect on the tax revenues of the state, and those revenues can translate into expenditures by the state which would contribute to improving the standards of living of the majority.
Large scale, what would be called the redistributive aspect of a liberal state, not even of a very progressive state, but a liberal state.
Yeah, that's true. But even that has happened on a very limited scale in India, maintaining the so-called fiscal discipline, which is maintaining a regime where you have low taxes as well as a low fiscal deficit. When it comes to a choice between that and spending on areas which have meaning for the large majority of the population, what we broadly call social sector expenditures, when it comes to a choice between the two, the choice has always been clear. It is the expenditures on social sector and other sectors, expenditures which benefit the people, which have always taken the axe. It is only in particular periods when the fiscal situation has been relatively comfortable, as happened for a period of time between 2003-04 and 2007-08, when because of high growth. And what was the contributor to the government's revenues in that period? Corporate taxes. That provides some bit of revenue for a period of time, which allows some increase in expenditure. No dramatic increases in expenditure happened even in that period, if you compare it to overall trends in the economy. But even that has dropped off as the economic situation has deteriorated. And if you look at the Indian government's budget in the last 2 years, even agriculture, rural development, even things like NREGA, the actual expenditures are being cut.
Also, in terms of the growth itself, really, if we take Indian infrastructure, roads, electricity, telecommunications, a lot of this ports, a lot of this basic infrastructure which would lead to manufacturing sector developing has not grown, acts as a huge bottleneck, and what has grown is really the service sector. So, even this aspect of the growth, which is divorced in that sense from physical growth, but really growth in terms of profits and monetary growth, that's really again a very serious imbalance in the Indian economy.
It's one of the least industrial economies of the world. Per capita levels of industrial production also are even lower relative to other countries, because India's per capita income or GDP is also significantly lower than even many other developing countries. So, in such a country, you have this particular trend, of course, that services, and it's not just services. In the last 15 years or so, another major sector of growth has been the construction sector. Real estate, reflecting the real estate boom, which is largely speculative kind of boom. So, construction has been one of the fastest growing sectors in the last 15 years. So, services and construction have accounted for roughly 73% of the increase in output over the last 20 years. And industry has accounted for a very small proportion, about 18% only. So, there is of course been that imbalance, which has reflected itself in other spheres of the economy. For example, the much talked about current account deficit problem also has a lot to do with that, because India's trade in manufactured products has been, it's importing a lot of products and not being able to export significantly. And that's been the source of serious problems as far as the India's macroeconomy is concerned. So, of course, there has been this imbalance in the sectoral composition of the growth is also matched by other kinds of imbalances that are there. So, if one looks at the last 20 years, if the fastest growing segment of the economy has been the corporate sector. It has grown at a pace at which it has never grown in the past, and in periods of relatively higher growth at about double the rate of the rest of the economy. And the corporate sector, of course, this is the private corporate sector, and this is a sector which employs barely 12 million people in a country with a workforce of over 450 million. And even the people it employs, even if you look at the distribution of the income generated within that corporate sector, virtually the entire benefit of this growth has gone to the profits or surplus segment of incomes, not to the wages and salaries. Of course, there is a segment of white collar employees whose salaries have grown, but the larger story of even the corporate sector, if one looks at the wages of blue collar workers, real wages, then it has been for 20 years, including in this much talked about period of 2004-5 to 2011-12, when poverty is supposed to have declined rapidly. Even in that period, what you see is real wages per worker in the organized industrial sector of the Indian economy have remained flat.
Surajit, the last part of it, of the debate between Sen and Bhagwati, leaving out Modi for Prime Minister or not, leaving that issue out, Sen has really pointed out that even countries which have got much lower per capita income than India, the inequalities, or at least the basic, what shall we say, basic indicators of health and other things have been relatively better. It's given the case of Bangladesh, where for instance infant mortality has come down below India, starting with a much higher figure. Talked about open defecation, that 50% of the Indian people don't have access to toilets. Well, Bangladesh is now only 8%. Also, you know, the hunger index, for instance, which shows that India is 15 from the bottom and well below countries which have at least even probably less than 2/3 of our per capita income. All of this is also indicative that growth by itself does not contribute to improvement of the lot of the people.
Yes, that is of course true. Growth by itself does not contribute, but even as far as this is concerned, in principle, yes, even with this growth and this kind of distribution of income that is there in India, it may have been possible for the state to have done a little bit better as some other countries with lower incomes have managed to do.
This is
On the that's the second one, but that's still missing the real point, which is that suppose I am interested in correcting that, what is the impediment to that? The impediment that one faces, and that's got to do with the nature of the growth trajectory also. The impediment to that is, if you are going to pursue a growth trajectory where you are going to rely on the private sector to drive the growth and the development process, where you are going to rely on foreign capital to bring money into the economy for investment, to finance your current account deficit and things like that. If you are going to rely on them, then what is the way in which you can, I mean, how is it that you are going to move towards a situation where you are going to be able to tax them adequately and spend on social sector? The nature of the growth trajectory itself pushes you in a different direction. So, if you have a problem as you have today, you have a current account deficit, what are you prompted to do? You are prompted to give concessions to foreign investors. When you have a growth problem, investment is slackening, you are prompted to give concessions to the private corporate sector so that they may invest. So, if concessions is the way in which you are going to drive the economy, how is it that you are going to be able to find the way to mobilize adequate resources to do this kind of expenditure? For various historical reasons, some countries may be doing a little better, some may be doing a little worse as far as this is concerned. But given the situation that exists, if you pursue the current kind of growth trajectory, there is no way that that problem can be corrected. And that's the point being missed when you simply talk about the fact that it could be better. Of course, it can always be better.
So, there is really not much wiggle room given the kind of growth trajectory being followed. So, though it appears to be a huge difference of outlook between Sen and Bhagwati, both in effect are not very dissimilar when it comes to the issue of growth. They do differ on the issue of this redistributive role of the state. That would be
yes, that would be a correct way of putting it, that there is some difference in the nature of the emphasis that they have, but neither is really questioning the essential character of the growth process, and neither is taking into account the fact that many of the disturbing phenomena as far as India is concerned on the development front are not despite, but precisely because of the growth.
Integral to the trajectory. Thank you, Surajit, for discussing with us this issue of what should be the India's growth trajectory and the implications thereof. We will follow this issue and this debate further as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you.